Haroldson e o tradutor sobem a escada para um marco muito conhecido em Sri Lanka. O famoso templo de pedra de Dambulla.
The next step in the investigation of this case leads us here to the Dambulla temple because Diluxi had spoken about it. And then the family, they decided to do something about Diluxi's talk. Diluxi's parents decided to call the abbot living in this temple and ask him if he knew of any girl who had died in this area and who fit the description given by Diluxi. In most of the countries where we find these cases, there is a belief in reincarnation.
Quando uma cultura permite a ideia da reencarnação, isso torna relatos de outras vidas mais prováveis? É uma das razões para os melhores casos serem encontrados em lugares como Sri Lanka?
Here in Sri Lanka, we find most of the cases among Buddhist families. Of course, the majority of the population here is Buddhist, about 2/3. But we also find some cases among Christians, and we even find a few among the Muslims. So the cases in Sri Lanka are found in all the major religious communities.
A chave do caso de Diluxi pode ser o abade do templo. Haroldson pode contar com o fato de que aqui sua investigação será levada a sério. A reencarnação é algo comum para um monge budista.
දැන් බුදුරජාණන් වහන්සේගේ බුද්ධ දේශනාවේ හැටියට උපදින හැම කෙනෙක්ම මැරෙනවා. ඒ මැරෙන හැම කෙනෙක්ම නැවත උපදිනවා. ඒකට ප්‍රධාන සාධකය වශයෙන් තියෙන කර්මය. ඒ කියන්නේ ඔවුන් විසින් කරන ලද කුසල අකුසල කර්ම. ඒ කුසල අකුසල කර්ම සමග තමයි මේ නැවත උපදීම කියන පුනරුත්පත්තිය කියලා අපි හඳුන්වන නැවත උපදීම සිදු වෙන්නේ.
Mas no caso de Diluxi, o abade não pode ajudar. Não conhece nenhuma família que se encaixe na história. Ele recomenda que procurem o jornal local. Um amigo do abade, um jornalista, decidiu investigar o caso após falar com o monge.
This is how the story continued. Mr. Apipala, he learned about the case. He went and interviewed Diluxi and the parents about what she had been saying about a previous life. It was then published a few days later. And this newspaper has a distribution all over the country.
Para o jornalista, era uma boa história.
මම මේ වගේ කතන්දර 30ක් 40ක් රිසර්ච් කරලා තිබුණා ඒ වෙනකොට. මොකද 1962 ඉඳලා 80 ගණනකට මම මාධ්‍යවේදියෙක් වශයෙන් අවුරුදු විශාල ගණනක් සේවය කළා තියෙනවා පොත්පත් ආයතන.
Todos ficaram pasmos com as lembranças misteriosas e os detalhes notáveis dos quais ela se lembrava. Mas uma pergunta ainda continua sem resposta. Os cientistas encontrarão provas da sua vida anterior? Em Morte? Um jornalista escreveu sobre a lembrança de Diluxi sobre uma vida passada. O artigo diz que ela viveu perto do templo de Dambulla. Algumas semanas após a publicação, o correio chega à casa dos Nissanka. Quando o carteiro entregou a correspondência, ele ficou surpreso em ver uma carta de Dambulla. Não tinha amigos nem parentes lá. Quando abriu a carta, ficou surpreso.
දම්බුල්ලේ මිනිහ ලියුමක් ලැබුණානේ. ඒක ඉතින් මට පුදුමයක්නේ අදහ ගන්නත් බෑ. මේකට අපි හොයලා බලන්න ඕනේ. මට බොහොම සන්තෝෂයි. පුදුමයක් නෙමෙයි.
A carta finalmente convenceu os pais de Diluxi. Eles iriam levá-la para o lugar onde ela acha que morreu. Fizeram uma viagem de 6 horas até Dambulla. Quando se aproximaram da cidade, ela reconheceu pontos de referência. Ela até dirigiu o motorista para a casa onde sua outra família morava. Até hoje, após vários encontros, é um encontro emocionante. Para Harrelson, é uma chance rara de testemunhar o que pode ser a interseção de duas vidas.
This meeting is quite emotional. It's only about in a third of all cases in Sri Lanka that you are able to find a connection between what that child is saying and a previous family or a person who died that fits the description. This is very rare.
Harrelson se surpreende com a mudança assim que Diluxi vê sua outra família. É menos tímida e parece se encaixar melhor nessa família. Ela poderia ser esta garota reencarnada?
හැසිරීම ඉතින් ගොඩක් හොඳයි. අම්මට අතරේම හරිම කීකරුයි. කොහෙවත් නොකිය යන්නෙත් නැහැ. නංගි මල්ලි එක්ක නිතරම සෙල්ලම් කරනවා. ඒ හොඳට ඉගෙන ගන්නත් පුළුවන්. දුක කියන්නේ ඉතින් අපි එයා ගෙවල් වල ගියාද කියලාත් ඒ වෙලාවේ මම හොයන්න 70ක භාගයක් විතර දිව්වා. පස්සේ දුවලා ඉවරනකොට මට එන්න බැරි වුණා සිහිනෙත් තියලා වැටිලා. වැටහිම එයා දැන් ඇවිල්ලා අපේ ගෙදරට ඇවිල්ලා එයාගේ ඇඳුම් බැඳුම් හොයාගත්තාම පොත්පත් හොයාගත්තා. අම්මා තාත්තා කියලා අඳුරගත්තා. එයා ඉතින් ඉස්සර ආත්ම කරපු දේවල් හැම දෙයක්ම කිව්වා. කිව්ව නිසා අපිට මෙයා අපේම දියණිය කියලා හිතුණා.
මට ඒක වැටහෙනවා. පින්තූර දිහා බලපුවාම ගෙවල් අර හැමදේම දැක්කහම ගොඩක් ආසත් හිතුණා. අනේක මට මේ පැත්ත නිකන් ගොඩාක් කල් මම මෙහෙ ඉඳලා වගේ මට පුරුදුකමක් වගේ හිතේ තියෙනවා.
No fim do dia, Diluxi passeia com Harrelson para mostrar o lugar da sua vida anterior.
When we compare how well these statements fit the life of Shiromi, we find that about 12 of them, we have around 20, about 12 of them fit really well and are fairly specific.
Diluxi o leva para a pedra onde diz que brincou como Shiromi. É uma pedra chata, como ela descreveu. A ponte sobre o rio também está lá. E este é o lugar onde Shiromi caiu na água.
බය හේතුව නම් කියන්න දන්නේ. එනොත් මම මෙතන ටික බයයි. අනිත් තැන් වලට වැඩිය මීට වැඩි වතුර තියෙන තැනකට වුණත් එහෙම බයක් හිතෙන්නේ නැහැ. මෙතෙන්ද බයයි මම.
Ela diz que lembra de pontos pretos antes de morrer. Ele acha que podem ser as plantas no rio. Há algo real nisso.
I think there is something real there. She has some real images of these events, but I think these images, these thoughts were with her from a very early age and even continue to some extent up to the present day.
Deluxe está convencida de que morreu aqui, na sua vida anterior. Para quem avalia as provas que Haraldson reuniu, a resposta é simples. Para quem acredita em reencarnação, esta pesquisa dá uma base científica para essa crença.
I think there is some likelihood of life after death, and I think that there might be something real in these memories, and that would then support the theory of reincarnation.
Apesar de o caso de Deluxe ser convincente, nem todos concordam com essas descobertas. Um deles é o Dr. Richard Wiseman, da Universidade de Hertfordshire, perto de Londres. Ele analisou as provas que os cientistas da reencarnação reuniram.
The question is what's going on there? And I think part of the problem with assessing the situation is you simply don't know the role that chance could play.
Para responder a esta pergunta, Wiseman fez uma experiência simples. Convidou crianças escolhidas a esmo e fez as mesmas perguntas que os pesquisadores de vidas passadas fariam.
The experiment that I carried out was really to test the notion that if you took a child and simply had them make up a story, can you take that information, then go away and compare it to the details of children who unfortunately have actually died and find some kind of match, the type of match that the researchers who are involved in reincarnation claims actually find in their work.
Muitas vezes, as crianças conversaram facilmente com ele sobre a morte.
One of the children I spoke to was Molly, and we asked her just to make up a story. She came up with the idea of another child called Katie, who was also 3.
What colour hair would you have? Any colour hair at all?
Red.
You'd have red hair?
Red hair.
She had blue eyes, she was wearing a pink dress with flowers on it. She ran away.
When Katie ran away, Molly?
What?
When Katie runs away, do good or bad things happen? Has anything bad ever happened to Katie?
Bad.
Bad? Oh, what's bad that's happened?
The monsters got Katie.
Oh, what were the monsters like?
Ugly.
They were ugly monsters. What happened?
No.
What happened to Katie when the monsters got her?
Monsters bit her.
They bit
her.
So what happened to Katie?
Died.
She died.
That was the story that Molly came up with. Now, what we wanted to know was, of course, if you took that story and you tried to match it against stories where genuine children, unfortunately, had actually died, could you find a match? And what we found was quite remarkable. We looked through the newspaper archives for stories, often very tragic stories, where children had been involved in accidents or had been abducted, been killed, and so on. One particular story matched the imaginary story that Molly had given us. The actual child was 3 years old. The actual child had red hair, blue eyes, a pink dress with flowers on it. The child lived very close to the seaside and enjoyed going to the beach. One day they ran away from the house, unfortunately were abducted and were killed. So out of the 17 facts that Molly gave us, 13 of them were absolutely correct. Now, if Molly was claiming to have lived before, this would be the reincarnation case of the decade.
Yes, yeah.
O resultado assustou até a mãe de Molly, que sabia que ela tinha inventado tudo.
I found that quite shocking. There was actually something that really happened. Because I know even if there's no connection, you sort of instantly feel connected then to something because of, you know, what Molly made up. I instantly sort of felt connected or felt for the parents of that particular child.
The notion that we've lived before is obviously very, very radical. And so part of what I was doing was trying to work out how can we assess the validity of the claims for reincarnation. I don't think we're finding out anything about the paranormal. I don't think we're finding out anything about whether or not we actually live in a previous life. We're finding out a great deal about psychology, about the way in which people can fool us and we can fool ourselves.
Mas e se houver casos de reencarnação que não se baseiam só na lembrança de crianças? Jim Tucker está a caminho de outro caso. É uma categoria de casos muito mais difícil para seus críticos contestarem.
The more that the cases were found, one started to come with birthmarks and birth defects, and we found that in many cases there was a striking correlation between the birthmarks on the children and wounds that the previous personalities had. And we've been able to track down autopsy reports or medical records to make sure that in fact there was a match there.
Pela primeira vez, estas marcas de nascença dão uma prova física verificável que sugere reencarnação.
We don't have a lot of American cases that have the birthmarks or birth defects along with the memories. We do have some, but it's unusual, so we certainly like to investigate all those that we can.
Jim está prestes a visitar um desses casos. Ele está indo para a Flórida para ver um menino que diz ter sido um policial em Nova York morto em um tiroteio.
When I was big, I was a police officer. I walked into a store one night. They were bad guys, too. They shot me dead.
Give me your money now.
Pensacola, a casa de Maria Hagdorn. Ela tem 2 filhos, Mia, de 2 anos, e Ian, de 5 anos. Ian está muito doente.
What kind of dress do you like to wear, Mia?
Seu filho sofre de uma rara doença do coração. Quando se esforça demais, fica sem ar e desmaia. Idas ao cardiologista são frequentes. A observação é obrigatória. Ian sofreu 6 cirurgias antes de fazer 4 anos.
He was a big, healthy 8.5-pound baby, and they took him off. They said to take a bath, give him a bath, and they never came back. Over an hour went by, so I sent my husband off to find the baby, and he came back quite a bit later with 2 doctors, and they were all crying, very visibly shaken, which I knew that the news was not good.
Disseram que Ian não sobreviveria um dia. Só uma cirurgia de emergência o salvaria. 6 horas após nascer, Ian sofreu uma grande cirurgia.
Ian had underdevelopment of the pulmonary valve, which is the artery right here we see in this drawing. And that caused the right side of his heart not to develop as well. And what that leads to is a lack of oxygen in his blood. So it's a condition where he is essentially suffocating because not enough oxygen is delivered to the brain and to the rest of the body.
A cirurgia correu bem. Após 9 horas, os médicos repararam a válvula. Mas o subdesenvolvimento do lado direito do coração levaria tempo e mais cirurgias. A vida de Ian ainda corre risco. O que traz Jim aqui é um evento que ocorreu 1 ano antes de Ian nascer.
My dad was a police officer, and he walked into Radio Shack, and he could tell something was going on. 2 guys up at the front desk pulled a machine gun out of their overcoat and pointed it at the manager. And my dad pulled his revolver and said, "Drop your weapons, I'm a police officer." And somebody was shooting him quite immediately after he said that. Were 12 people get lightheaded?
Jim e Maria revêem a autópsia do pai. A causa da morte se destaca para quem a lê. Seu pai morreu devido a uma artéria pulmonar rompida causada por um tiro. A mesma artéria que faz Ian sofrer. Mas algo mais estranho aconteceu.
The first time was when he was about 3, and I was doing some work in my office, and he was making quite a bit of noise, and I had threatened him with a spanking if he didn't quiet down. And he stood there and looked at me and said, "When you were a little girl and I was your daddy, lots of times you were bad and I never spanked you." Which just kind of blew me away. He didn't get a spanking.
Ian começou a falar mais sobre o avô.
Growing up, we had 2 cats, a black cat and a white cat, and the black cat was Maniac, and the white cat was Boston. So one day I was doing something, and Ian came over to me and he said, "Mom, when you were a little girl and I was your daddy, what was my cat's name?" And I said, "Maniac?" And he said, "No, the white one." And I said, "Boston?" And he said, "I used to call him Boss, right?" So he knew the color of the cats, and he knew the nickname that only my dad used to call Boston.
Maria tem muitas histórias como esta de Ian. Ela está convencida de que Ian é seu pai reencarnado. Não são só as histórias, mas também a prova física. A correlação entre a doença e a lesão mortal do pai removeu todas as dúvidas.
Much of these cases often involves memories and statements and behaviors. The birthmarks are something that's completely objective, and it's something that is beyond memory or beyond chance.
Talvez a memória de Ian o engane. Talvez o que diz esteja ligado ao avô por mero acaso. Mas a combinação de memória e prova física é muito convincente.
I didn't want to go back, but God just gave me to you.
God gave you to your mom,
Yes.
even though you didn't want to come back?
O caso de Ian Hector exige a pergunta: o que significam todas essas provas?
There are obviously huge questions here which we haven't even begun to try to answer, such as, is there a soul? If so, what does that term even mean? How does it get carried over from one life to the next? When you look at all these cases, you can certainly focus on the weaknesses if you choose to. But I think there's also enough here so that if you choose, you can step back and say that there may just be something remarkable going on.
Se o Dr. Tucker estiver certo, as lembranças de todas as crianças podem significar que a morte pode ser apenas um caminho para uma outra vida.